Mara woke to a morning that ran on rails. Coffee already poured. The calendar showed a neat block of appointments. She moved through the townhouse as if in a dream. A faint smell of smoke hung in the air. Mara caught herself humming and didn't think twice about it. The empty second bedroom door stood open, revealing emptiness. She felt like a hole, but she'd learned to fill it with routines instead of memories. Mara poured herself coffee, black, and sat down as the news chattered on. The leady ad flashed across the screen again. For those who've been touched by trauma, a soothing voice declared. Mara watched, expressionless. She headed for the shower, water hot enough to burn her skin without pain. "What's wrong?" Elias called from the bedroom. "Just a moment," Mara replied, steadying herself against the tile wall as dizziness swirled inside her skull. She felt off. Mara glanced up at Elias. "I think I might be coming down with something," Mara said, trying to sound casual. The words tasted like copper. She felt a strange sense of unease. Mara wondered if Elias was hiding something from her. Like and subscribe for more stories like this one. Mara woke to a morning that ran on rails, coffee already poured. The cat curled around Elias's ankles as he kissed her good morning. The calendar on the kitchen wall showed a neat block of appointments, including today's therapy checkup at Letha Neuro. She caught herself humming and didn't think twice about it. The townhouse was warm and over-curated, every surface polished to a sheen that reflected light like glass. Mara moved through it as if in a dream, following the route etched by 18 months of repetition. The empty second bedroom door stood open, revealing the sparse space Elias had cleared out during their separation. It felt like a hole, but she'd learned to fill it with routines instead of memories. She poured herself coffee, black, and sat down at the kitchen table as the news chattered on in the background. The Lee ad flashed across the screen again, the smiling family photos blurring into one pleasant face. For those who've been touched by trauma, a soothing voice declared, "Letha can help you rediscover happiness." Mara watched, expressionless, and wondered how far back that happiness could be erased. The cat leapt onto her lap, purring loudly as she stroked its soft fur. A familiar lullaby began playing in the background, one Elias had sung to their daughter Junie before bedtime. But Mara couldn't quite place it, not hers anymore. The words dissolved into a haze of longing and uncertainty. She headed for the shower, water hot enough to burn her skin without pain, just as she liked. Rinsing off, she caught sight of herself in the foggy mirror, hazel eyes clouded with confusion, mouth set in a line of indifference. In that instant, something felt off. "What's wrong?" Elias called from the bedroom. "Just a moment," Mara replied, steadying herself against the tile wall as dizziness swirled inside her skull. She took several deep breaths, waiting for the sensation to pass. It did, leaving behind only the faintest smell of smoke that vanished when she exhaled. By the time Elias joined her in the bathroom, she was smiling and sipping a fresh cup of coffee. "I think I might be coming down with something," Mara said, trying to sound casual. The words tasted like copper, bitter and metallic on her tongue. She glanced up at Elias, hoping he wouldn't notice anything out of place. "You look fine to me. Maybe we should skip the therapy today if you're not feeling well." "No," Mara replied firmly. "I need it." The Letha implant's calibration checks were her lifeline in this gray drizzle world. Without them, she might lose herself entirely. He nodded reluctantly and kissed her forehead. "You go get dressed then. I'll make breakfast." After dressing in a pale blue sweater and black jeans, Mara made her way back to the kitchen. A plate of scrambled eggs and toast was waiting for her. She sat down as Elias slid into his chair across from hers. "Remember that time we took Junie to the park?" he said, smiling softly at some private memory. "She chased after those ducks until she fell down laughing." Mara looked at him, trying to place the face in front of her on a sea of forgotten days and nights. A fragment surfaced, Junie's small hand clasping hers as they walked through the grass, The lullaby Elias used to sing at bedtime, the yellow rubber boot that had appeared once in her closet. Her nose began bleeding, dripping down onto the toast she'd been about to eat. It took her a moment to register the pain and taste of blood mingling with butter. She reached for a napkin, fingers trembling as she dabbed at her nostrils. Elias's expression changed from nostalgia to concern. "Mara, are you okay?" He grabbed another napkin and handed it over. "Let me see." She pushed his hand away, not wanting him to notice the faint scar behind her left ear. The only physical reminder of that long-ago incident she couldn't bring herself to name. Instead, she stared at him, trying to parse what he meant by that fleeting memory. "Of course I'm fine," Mara lied, wiping her nose with a fresh napkin. "Just a little off." She smiled again, attempting to reassure him everything was all right. But the taste of copper lingered in her mouth, and the smoke smell refused to go away. After breakfast, Mara hurried through her routine tasks, loading the dishwasher, watering the plants, folding laundry, with a restlessness she couldn't shake. The lithium plant's soothing hum thrummed in her ear as always, but today its presence felt more artificial than reassuring. She paused by the empty second bedroom door and hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, the room was spotless, every trace of Junie erased, just as Elias had insisted. Mara stood there a moment, hand on the doorknob, then withdrew. It wasn't that she feared seeing ghosts, though Junie's spirit lingered in her thoughts like a persistent whisper. No, it was something deeper, the realization that even the walls could lie to her. Mara glanced at the clock and remembered her scheduled therapy checkup with Dr. Soleil at Lethe Clinic. She'd always dreaded these appointments, but lately they seemed less intrusive, more routine than invasive. Perhaps it was because she'd grown accustomed to the implant's numbing effects, or because Elias had taken over most of Junie's care, freeing Mara from painful reminders. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, pushing aside the nagging unease. After all, Lee had been her salvation 18 months ago, when grief threatened to swallow her whole. She'd agreed to the implant as a last resort, desperate for relief from the crushing weight of loss. And it worked. She felt better now, more like herself again. Mara's reflection in the hall mirror looked calm and composed, but beneath that veneer, doubt churned like an undercurrent threatening to drag her down. What if Lethe wasn't as benign as she believed? What if Elias was hiding something from her? And why did the smell of smoke seem to cling to her so persistently lately? As she headed out the door, Mara tucked her concerns away. She'd face them another time after she had some distance and clarity. For now it was enough to focus on living, on moving forward without being held back by grief. The Lethe Clinic's sterile white walls seemed to swallow her whole as she entered for her scheduled appointment with Dr. Soleil. Mara settled onto the examination table, presenting herself coolly as always, a patient under control. "Good morning, Mara." Dr. Soleil greeted her warmly, her voice like honey and reassurance. "How are you feeling today?" Mara shrugged, watching the doctor's hands move methodically through their checklist of questions. It all felt so routine now, almost like a ritual designed to keep her in check rather than truly address the trauma she'd endured. "I'm doing well," Mara replied dutifully, barely registering Soleil's probes into her emotional state. "The implant is working smoothly." Sol smiled, nodding. "Excellent. Your progress has been remarkable." She paused, flipping through Mara's chart with a flicker of concern on her face. "We did notice some minor fluctuations in your readings recently. Nothing to worry about, but we'll monitor it closely." Mara's eyes narrowed. What kind of minor fluctuations was Soleil referring to? Were they connected to those recurring nosebleeds and lingering smells she couldn't explain? She opened her mouth to ask, but the doctor's gentle reassurance drowned out any protest. "It seems you're handling your emotions beautifully," Dr. Soleil said, logging Mara's responses into the system. "The implant is doing exactly what it was designed for, providing a safe haven from distress." Mara felt herself relaxing under the doctor's soothing words, but something pricked at the back of her mind like an insect buzzing just out of sight. The Lethe implant wasn't meant to be a permanent solution, she knew that deep down. But now, 18 months into this safety net, Mara wondered if Soleil was telling her the whole truth about its effects. As she left the clinic with a fresh round of mood-stabilizing drugs and an appointment scheduled for another month, Mara felt a strange sense of unease creeping over her. Perhaps it was the lingering smell of smoke or the phantom itching behind her ear. Reminders of events and emotions Lee insisted on burying forever. Or maybe it was simply the realization that she had no control over her own memories, that her husband and doctor conspired to shape reality for her. Whatever the cause, Mara knew one thing with certainty. Her peace came at a terrible cost, one she couldn't ignore any longer. The lithium implant might have kept her from drowning in grief, but it also erased her daughter's existence, rendering her memories into nothing more than ghosts and echoes. And now that those fragments were starting to break free, Mara was left with no choice but to confront the reality of what had been taken away. As she walked through the drizzle-soaked streets toward home, Mara felt a familiar tension building in her chest, a precursor to the bleed episodes that seemed to come more frequently lately. She quickened her pace, trying to outrun the panic rising within her, but deep down she knew it was no use. The truth would out. All she had to do was face it head-on. And so Mara walked on, letting the gray rain wash over her, into her bones, a prelude to the storm that threatened to upend her carefully constructed world and force her to confront the emptiness that Lee had promised to fill. The chill rain dampened Mara's coat as she hurried up the stairs, her mind still reeling from the unsettling consultation with Dr. Soleil. The woman's words had been soothing, reassuring even, but they couldn't dispel the growing sense of unease Mara felt. She had always known that the lithium implant was altering reality for her, smoothing out the jagged edges of grief and trauma until they were barely noticeable. But she had never questioned its motives or methods before. Now, after Soleil's cryptic comments about revisions and consent, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. It wasn't just the way her memories seemed to shift and blur whenever she got close to Junie, as if some part of her mind were deliberately hiding the truth. Mara paused at their townhouse door, fumbling with her keys while she tried to piece together the fragments of what she knew. Junie, the daughter she couldn't remember, the one Elias had forbidden her from talking about, who he claimed didn't exist in any records or photos. And yet, there was that boot, and the recurring auto payments to a grief support group she'd never authorized. A faint smell of smoke wafted through the open doorway as Mara pushed it aside, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Junie's rubber boot sitting on the entry table where they always kept their keys. For an instant, she felt a rush of panic. Had Elias brought it in with him? Was he testing her, waiting to see how long it would take for her to remember? Memories of Junie. She'd actively erased them, along with every shred of grief that came with losing a child. And Elias had been there, signing off on it all, even though he knew how much she loved their daughter. Mara's breath came in short gasps as the truth settled around her like a shroud. She thought back to those endless weeks when Junie was missing, presumed dead from the fire that ravaged their old townhouse. Weeks spent in limbo, not knowing if she would ever find out what really happened, or see her little girl's face again. And then Lethe had offered its solution, an implant that would suppress her grief and keep her stable, while Elias dealt with the legalities and paperwork. Mara had been desperate for peace, willing to try anything to make the pain stop. So she'd let them put it in, trusting Elias's judgment when he said it was safe. But now, as she stared at that innocuous yellow boot, Mara knew the truth. She hadn't been saved by Lethe, she'd been deceived, and her husband had been complicit all along. "Mara?" Elias called from down the hall, his voice wary and uncertain. "Everything okay?" She took a deep breath before answering, trying to calm the storm brewing inside her. "Yeah, I'm fine," she lied. "Just got distracted by Junie's toy." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Elias spoke again, his words measured and cautious. "Okay, well, dinner should be about ready if you want to join me in the kitchen." Mara hesitated, weighing her options. Part of her wanted to confront him right then, to demand answers and force him to acknowledge what they'd both done. And so Mara made herself smile as she headed toward the kitchen, tucking Junie's boot into her pocket as a secret talisman. She would wait. She would gather her strength and bide her time until Elias let his guard down enough for her to confront him. Because in that moment she knew it was only a matter of time before Mara Vance unearthed the truth about what Lethe had really done to her and what her husband had willingly given away. The kitchen was warm, filled with the aroma of simmering vegetables and roasting chicken. Elias stood at the stove, his back to her as he stirred the pot with a wooden spoon. Junie's calendar for the week ahead. Another habitual distraction. Elias turned and smiled, wiping his hands on a towel before joining her with a plate of food. "I'm glad you like it," he said, sliding into the chair across from hers. They ate in silence at first, each lost in their own thoughts as they chewed. The tension between them was palpable. Mara broke the quiet finally, choosing her words carefully. "How's work?" she asked, a question she'd been putting off. Elias shrugged, his eyes flicking up to meet hers for a split second before dropping back to his plate. "It's fine," he said, monotone. "Same old." The answer lacked any real enthusiasm or detail, and Mara felt her frustration simmering just below the surface. "And what about your project?" she pressed on, knowing it was a sore spot with him, but also desperate for some topic of conversation that didn't revolve around Junie. Elias had been working on this mysterious project in his home office since before their daughter's death, and Mara knew he'd promised her regular updates, but nothing ever seemed to change. "It's still ongoing," Elias replied, his tone stiffening as he met her gaze. "I'm just trying to make sure I get it right." Mara recognized the defensive edge in his voice and chose not to push further, knowing that whatever this project was, Elias wasn't ready to share the details. She decided instead to let the topic drop. The truths hung in the air like a challenge she couldn't quite meet. Finally, as Elias began clearing off the table, Mara reached out and touched his arm, halting him. He looked down at her hand, then up into her eyes, and for one fleeting moment she saw something raw and vulnerable there, something that might have been fear or guilt or both. "Let's take a walk," Mara said, standing up abruptly. "Get some fresh air." She needed to clear her head, to try and regain some of the calm Elias seemed to possess so effortlessly. He nodded, his expression unreadable, and they left the house together without another word. The rain had let up since morning, but the sky remained a dull gray, mirroring Mara's mood as she walked alongside Elias down the sidewalk toward the park. They didn't talk again until they reached the path that wound through the trees. The sound of leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, providing a soothing backdrop to their conversation. Elias cleared his throat and began to speak, his words measured and controlled. "I know it's been tough lately," he said, "and I'm sorry for everything we're going through." There was an awkward pause before he added, "Maybe it would be better if you talked about your memories with Dr. Saul again." Mara stopped walking, her heart sinking as she processed his words. This wasn't what she needed. More manipulation and avoidance rather than honest communication. "Why?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Because you don't want to face the truth either? Because it's easier to pretend everything is fine if we just bury our heads in the sand?" Elias sighed, running a hand through his hair as he looked away from her. "That's not fair," he said quietly. Mara countered, her anger rising. "Then tell me, Elias, what truth are you so desperate to avoid? What have we both been hiding behind these empty rooms and polished surfaces?" For a moment, she thought she saw something crack in him, like a thin fissure spreading across his facade of calm. But before she could press on, he composed himself once more. "Look," he said, turning back to her with an exasperated expression, "I didn't want you to have to carry this grief alone anymore." Lethe promised they could help, and at first it seemed like a miracle. Mara's grip tightened around the phone in her pocket, Junie's rubber boot pressing uncomfortably into her thigh as she felt the familiar sting of betrayal. "A miracle," she repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "The cheap illusion to make us forget what we really lost." She took a step closer to him, her voice dropping to a low growl. "But it didn't work, did it? Because no matter how much Lethe scrubbed and rewrote your memories, they can't erase the truth that our daughter is gone. Elias's eyes flashed with pain, but he stood his ground against Mara's onslaught. "We knew there would be difficulties," he argued. "But we also knew there was no other choice. We had to save you from drowning in your own despair." Mara shook her head, refusing to buy into the lies anymore. "No, Elias, we chose it. You and I both made that decision together." Her voice trembled with rage and grief as she confronted him, the truth finally spilling out of her like blood from a wound long overdue for cleaning. "And now we have to face what we've done." Elias looked at her, his eyes brimming with regret and fear. "You have to understand," he pleaded. "It was for your own good. Without Lise, you wouldn't be here right now." The words felt like daggers piercing Mara's heart. She took another step closer, the distance between them shrinking until they were nearly nose to nose. "I would rather not have been here at all than live this lie," she spat out through clenched teeth. Elias flinched as if struck, but he refused to back down. "We can't change what's done," he said stubbornly. "The only way forward is to embrace the peace we've found." Mara laughed bitterly. "Peace? This isn't peace, Elias. It's a prison of our own making." She glanced down at the phone still clutched in her hand, and knew she had reached a crossroads. If she handed it back to him now, she would be agreeing to return to their carefully constructed facade. But something inside Mara snapped, refusing to let go of the truth any longer. With shaking fingers, she dialed Cade's number again, ignoring Elias's frantic protests as he tried to wrestle the phone from her grasp. As soon as Cade picked up on the other end, Mara whispered urgently, "I need you to come get me." She ended the call before Elias could argue further and shoved the phone into his hand. "You have 20 minutes, she warned coldly. Elias's face contorted in anguish as he stared at her, but Mara turned away, already walking back towards their townhouse. She needed a few moments to gather herself before Cade arrived. The rain had stopped by the time she reached the front door, the droplets on the windows casting an eerie glow over the otherwise empty interior. She paced around the living room, running her fingers along the sterile surface of the coffee table, wondering if Elias had ever suspected what was happening behind Lethe's glass walls. How much of her daughter remained stored in the clinic's database? What other memories were locked away and inaccessible? The sound of tires crunching against gravel outside jolted Mara out of her reverie. She walked to the window just as Cade pulled up in his dilapidated van, the engine sputtering to a stop. She opened the door before he could knock and slipped into the passenger seat beside him. "Ready to get your shit back?" he asked, eyeing her warily. Mara didn't reply. Instead, she dug through her purse until she found the yellow boot and pressed it firmly into her palm, its soft rubber familiar beneath her fingertips. For an instant, she closed her eyes and remembered Junie's tiny foot slipping inside, the way the child's face lit up with joy as she looked up at Mara. A faint wail echoed in Mara's mind, a sound so like Junie's that it made her chest ache. But this time there was no accompanying warmth of recognition or comfort. Instead, the memory felt hollow and distant, as if seen through a pane of frosted glass. Mara opened her eyes to find Cade staring at her intently. "You okay?" he asked softly, noticing her faraway look. Mara took a deep breath before responding. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted, "but I'm willing to try." With that, she handed the boot over to him and leaned back in the seat, preparing herself for whatever lay ahead. As they drove off into the drizzly evening, Mara felt a flicker of hope, however faint, for the first time since the clinic. Perhaps it was finally possible to reclaim her daughter's memory without losing her own soul in the process. Cade glanced over at Mara, gauging her resolve as he steered the van through the rain-slicked streets. The Lethe Clinic's concrete walls had finally crumbled under her assault of truth. She'd been handed the fragments of a life once scrubbed away by the implant. Now it was time to put those pieces back together again. "You know what you're getting into?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of concern and curiosity. "The full restoration's gonna be rough." Mara squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, as if trying to block out the memories already threatening to overwhelm her. When she opened them again, they held a determination that seemed almost palpable in the van's dim interior. I have to, she said firmly. There's no going back now. Cade nodded, giving her shoulder an encouraging squeeze before refocusing on the road ahead. They'd be at his laundromat hideout soon, a place where he could use his jury-rigged console to read and rewrite Mara's implant without anyone else meddling. All right, he said finally. It's time. He pulled into the alley behind the shuttered laundromat, killed the engine, and turned to face her. With practiced ease, Cade pulled out a reader device from his backpack, its sleek metal surface glinting in the faint light seeping through the van's grimy windows. Mara felt a shiver run down her spine as he began to attach electrodes to her scalp, the cold metal tingling against her skin. The air in the van seemed suddenly heavy with tension. This was it, the moment when Mara would finally have access to the memories and emotions Leith had suppressed for so long. Ready? Cade asked, his eyes flicking up from the device's glowing screen to meet hers. Mara took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. With that, she leaned back against the van's worn upholstery, bracing herself for whatever revelations were about to come flooding back. The console hummed quietly in Cade's hands as he initiated the restore sequence, and Mara closed her eyes, preparing herself to face the ghosts of a past she'd been denied, all while praying that when it was over, she might finally be able to lay her daughter to rest. The world went dark for a moment, and then, like a dam bursting, memories came rushing back. Fragments of childhood days swirled around Mara in vivid technicolor. Junie's giggles echoing through the kitchen as they baked cookies, the way the sun-kissed girl's hair shone like spun gold when she played outside with her friends. But these weren't just flashes of happiness. There were darker moments too, flickers of fear and panic that made Mara's stomach twist into knots. The smell of smoke, the sound of glass shattering, voices shouting and screaming in a cacophony of terror. And then, suddenly, it was over. Mara gasped for breath as the memories faded away, leaving her feeling both relieved and bereft. She opened her eyes to find Cade studying her intently, his face etched with concern. "How are you doing?" he asked, softly. Mara took a moment before responding, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I remember my daughter." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, one that neither of them had fully anticipated. But Cade reached out and squeezed Mara's hand reassuringly. "Then maybe it's time you faced what's left," he said gently, as if offering her a chance to finally lay some old demons to rest. "There's more to the story, Mara. Much more." "Mara." Cade's voice was soft but firm as he squeezed her hand again. "We need to get you out of here, back to the townhouse before they realize what happened." Mara nodded numbly, still reeling from the flood of memories. She stumbled out of the laundromat data den with Cade supporting her physically and emotionally. The drive to her home was a blur. Mara couldn't tear her gaze away from the world streaming by the van's windows, now that she had a new lens through which to view it all. Everything seemed filtered, suffused with a bittersweet nostalgia for a life she'd never truly known. When they arrived at the van's townhouse, Cade parked on the street, keeping a low profile as he helped Mara inside under cover of darkness. The second bedroom stood empty, its door still shut tight against any intruding light or sound from outside. As soon as they were in the relative privacy of her own home, Mara turned to face Cade with an intensity that made him take a step back involuntarily. "The boot," she demanded, holding up the yellow rubber slipper between them like an accusation. "Was it ever real?" Cade's mouth opened and closed without sound before he finally answered, his voice low and honest. "I found it in your cloud folder after you passed out at my place that night." The file was named Junie's boot. There was a note too, something about finding comfort in the everyday things left behind. Mara's hand tightened around the boot as she recalled the phantom itch behind her ear, the smell of smoke that hadn't been there. "So it wasn't a stray object or someone else's child," she said, stating facts more than asking questions. "Nope." Cade shook his head slowly, meeting Mara's gaze without flinching. The boot was real. Junie wore it on rainy days like this one. A shiver ran down Mara's spine as the weight of that simple statement settled over her. She looked around the townhouse once more with new eyes, seeing every carefully curated artifact and empty space through the lens of a mother who'd lost too much. "How am I supposed to live in here now?" she whispered, feeling the walls closing in despite the absence of any physical barrier. "I don't know what's real or true anymore." Cade stepped forward again, his touch gentle as he brushed aside a strand of hair that had fallen across Mara's face. "Maybe it's time you figured that out," he suggested softly, his words layered with a quiet understanding she desperately needed right now. Before Mara could respond to the unspoken challenge in Cade's eyes, her phone buzzed on the coffee table where they'd set it down earlier. An incoming call from Dr. Ines Sully at Lethe Clinic. The timing couldn't be more ironic. With Cade watching intently, Mara picked up the phone and answered, already dreading the inevitable conversation about recalibration or further adjustments to her implant settings. She had a feeling that whatever Dr. Sol proposed next would change everything once again, for better or worse. "Hello," Mara said tentatively into the receiver, bracing herself for what came next while Cade waited patiently by her side, ready to face the fallout alongside her. "Hello," Mara repeated into the receiver, the word feeling hollow in her mouth as she waited for Dr. Sol's voice on the other end. "Mara, dear," the doctor said soothingly, "I hope you're doing well. I understand this may come as a surprise, but we've been reviewing your implant data and noticed some inconsistencies." Inconsistencies, Mara thought, her mind racing to cover over any holes in her mental landscape that might have appeared since the last calibration. "We believe it's time for a minor adjustment," Dr. Sula continued smoothly, "something to help you reintegrate more fully into your daily life without these occasional episodes." Mara felt Cade's eyes on her, his presence grounding her as she considered what the doctor was saying. "Episodes," she echoed, though she knew exactly which one Soleil meant. "The nosebleeds, perhaps some auditory distortions or visual anomalies, nothing to be alarmed about. Just your brain relearning how to process reality." Mara bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. It seemed she wasn't the only one whose body had a mind of its own these days. "And this minor adjustment you mentioned?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "We can complete your edit remotely using our secure server and implant reader. You won't feel a thing." Mara glanced at Cade again, wondering if he could read the turmoil on her face as clearly as she felt it in herself. Part of her yearned for that peace, for the world to stop bleeding into her consciousness like it had since Junie's ghost started haunting her every waking moment. "Do you need me to come in?" Dr. Sol asked, unaware or uncaring about Mara's internal debate. "No," Mara said finally, making a decision based on a gut instinct more than logic. I'll do it here." There was a pause before the doctor responded. "Very well then, just let me guide you through the process." As they went through the steps, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that she was surrendering something precious, her daughter's memory, her own sanity perhaps, to the mercy of Lethe and its creators. But Dr. Soli sounded so reassuring, her words like a soothing balm for Mara's frayed nerves. It wasn't until after the adjustment had been made that Mara realized what she'd agreed to. The doctor had asked if she wanted to set up regular maintenance appointments to keep her implant running smoothly. "Yes," Mara said reflexively without hesitation, even as Cade's expression darkened in disbelief beside her. "Excellent," Dr. Sully replied with a pleased note in her voice. "We'll send you a reminder when it's time for your next checkup. In the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out if you notice any changes or have concerns." Mara hung up, staring at the phone as if it held all the answers she'd never wanted to confront about her life with Lethe. "What did you just do?" Cade demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "You said no, Mara. You told him no." She turned to him, blinking back a sudden rush of tears. "I had to," she whispered. "I couldn't take the bleeding anymore." Cade's face twisted in disgust. "That wasn't what I meant, and you know it. They're not fixing your problems, they're just hiding them better with more drugs and programming. You can't keep pretending this is normal." Mara felt a familiar sting of anger at his criticism, even as a part of her acknowledged the truth in his words. "It's what I need right now," she insisted, trying to stand her ground despite the tremors running through her body. "You don't know that," Cade shot back angrily. "All you're doing is trading one kind of pain for another, and who's making those choices for you?" His question hung in the air like a challenge, and Mara realized that he was right. She had given away control over her own life to Lethe again, because she couldn't bear the uncertainty of living without their help. "You're not alone," he said fiercely. "I can help you remember what's real and what they've taken from you." Mara looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest as she weighed her options. Was she willing to risk everything for the chance to reclaim her daughter, her memories, herself? "I'll call you," she said finally, swallowing hard against the lump in her throat. "I need time to think." Cade nodded curtly, but his eyes still held a silent plea for her to make the right decision. As he turned to leave, Mara felt a spark of defiance ignite within her. Maybe it was finally time to stop running from Junie's ghost and face whatever lay beyond the veil of Lethe's mercy. She just hoped she wasn't too late. Mara sat at her kitchen table staring at the cold cup of coffee in front of her. It was after midnight, but she couldn't sleep, not with all these thoughts racing through her mind. The meeting with Cade had left her shaken and confused. Part of her wanted to believe he could help her, that it was possible to undo what Lee had done, but the other part was terrified of getting hurt again. She glanced down at Junie's rubber boot on the table beside her. It looked so small and helpless, like a child's toy. But when Mara picked it up in her fingers, she could almost feel her daughter's presence, warm and soft and real. The memories were still fragmented, but with each passing day they grew stronger, more vivid. Mara closed her eyes and listened to the silence of the night. She could hear Junie humming in the background now, that same lullaby Cade had shared with her before he left. It was both comforting and heartbreaking, a reminder of everything she'd lost. Suddenly, Mara's phone buzzed on the counter, making her jump. Her heart raced as she picked it up, fearing it might be Elias or Dr. Sole calling to check in. But when she saw Cade's number flashing, she hesitated only for a moment before answering. "Hey," he said quietly on the other end of the line. "I couldn't sleep either." Mara smiled wryly at his words. "Probably because we've got too much to think about." "Yeah," Cade agreed. There was a pause, and then he asked bluntly, "So, what's it going to be? Are you in or out?" "In or out," Mara repeated slowly. It felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into an abyss. But at least here, there was a chance for her to reclaim her life, to face whatever truths lay hidden beneath Lethe's surface. "I'm in," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremors running through her body. "Let's do this." Cade let out a soft whoop of triumph on the other end of the line, and Mara felt a surge of determination rise up within her. This was it, her chance to break free from Lethe's control and take back what they'd stolen from her. "I'll start working on that implant reader," Cade said, his voice full of excitement now. "Should have something ready for you by the weekend." "Sounds good," Mara agreed. She glanced down at Junie's boot again, her fingers tightening around it in anticipation. "See you then." As she hung up and set the phone back on the counter, Mara felt a weight lift off her shoulders, like she was finally letting go of the fear that had held her hostage for so long. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges and setbacks aplenty. But she also knew this was what she needed to do, to face the truth about her daughter's death, even if it meant embracing the pain and grief that came with it. And somehow, knowing Cade was on her side made all the difference. With a newfound sense of purpose, Mara rose from her chair and walked over to the mantel in her living room. She picked up Junie's boot and held it close, feeling the soft rubber between her fingers. For the first time in 18 months, she allowed herself to imagine what Junie might have looked like. The way her hair curled at the nape of her neck, the gap-toothed smile that lit up Mara's world. And then, with a quiet resolve, she placed the boot back on the mantel and turned away from it. She had things to do, people to see, all in the name of reclaiming her daughter's memory and making peace with the past. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, But Mara knew that every step she took was one closer to healing and redemption, even if it meant facing the darkest corners of her own mind. She only hoped she had the strength to see it through. Mara stepped out into the cool evening air, her eyes adjusting slowly from the warm glow of her living room to the dimly lit streets outside. She breathed in deeply, letting the dampness fill her lungs. It was a familiar scent now, comforting like coming home. As she walked, Mara's mind wandered back to Cade and the data den beneath the laundromat. Whatever's behind that wall, the machine thought you couldn't live with it. And he was right. For 18 months, Lathy had kept Mara's grief safely contained. A small, manageable ache nestled in the quiet corners of her mind. But now that door had been pried open, and the raw emotion was flooding out like an unleashed torrent. It hurt more than she'd imagined possible, this sudden, brutal awakening to the depths of her loss. But somehow it felt real, authentic. A part of her had always known Junie's absence, even when Lethe suppressed the memory. Mara quickened her pace as she approached the old park near their townhouse. The rain had stopped, but mist hung low over the grass, and the streetlights cast an eerie glow on the wet pavement. She shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her. As she entered the park's main path, Mara spotted a lone figure seated on a bench, Elias. His back was to her, his shoulders hunched in defeat. A pang of sadness hit her, followed by a surge of anger. How could he have done this to her? Erased their daughter from their lives without even asking? Gaze faltered for a moment before he looked away. There's nothing to say. I made the decision that seemed best at the time. Best? Mara's voice rose in outrage. You call erasing our daughter from my mind best? Do you have any idea what that did to me? I was trying to protect you, Elias said, his voice cracking. Protect me, Mara spat. From what? Grief? Mourning a child I lost? Is that so unbearable you'd rather make me forget her altogether? Elias closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there were tears in them, not just from the anger, but also a deep, abiding sorrow. I did it for us, he said. I couldn't bear to watch you suffer like that. Mara shook her head, incredulous. You think suffering is forgetting? You think taking away Junie's existence would somehow save me? Elias looked at her helplessly, and Mara saw the truth in his eyes. He didn't know anymore. He'd lost touch with what mattered most, blinded by his own fear of pain. I've been living a lie for 18 months, Mara said, her voice heavy with resignation. But no more. I'm done running from my grief. Elias reached out to her, but Mara stepped back, putting distance between them. It's not you I blame, she said gently. It's the Lethe implant. The way they lied to us, manipulated us into thinking we'd found a solution when all it did was erase our daughter from history. She turned and walked away from him, leaving Elias sitting alone on the bench, his eyes fixed on her retreating figure. As Mara made her way back home, she felt a sense of determination growing within her, an unwavering resolve to reclaim not just her memories, but also her rights as Junie's mother. Comfort in its familiarity. Cade checked in on her periodically, sending cryptic texts with links to videos or articles that seemed unrelated but held deeper meanings only he understood. Mara sensed a growing unease beneath his carefree facade. She knew his own memories were tainted by Lethe's manipulations. One day, Cade texted a single word, video. Mara's heart skipped a beat as a private message popped up on her phone screen. The sender was listed as unknown. Inside the attachment, there was no audio but a grainy video filmed from above, showing Junie playing in their backyard. She was dressed in rain gear, splashing in puddles and laughing uncontrollably while Mara knelt beside her, brushing wet hair out of Junie's face. The sight of them together, in that ordinary moment before the fire, was like a punch to the chest. Mara felt hot tears spill down her cheeks as she watched herself smile at Junie, remembering the way it used to feel. The joy, the pride, the overwhelming love for this child who'd been ripped from her life. She forwarded the video to Elias without comment, unsure what he would make of it but needing him to see. And then, almost by reflex, She reached up and touched the scar on the back of her neck where the lithium implant had once resided. Her fingertips hovered there a moment before dropping away, leaving a faint echo of emptiness. She wondered if Elias would ever understand that the implant hadn't restored anything, only torn down the walls Mara's mind had built to keep her grief at bay. For 18 months she'd been living in denial, pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. Now, with Junie's video playing on repeat in her mind, Mara finally felt ready to face the truth head-on. Each one was like a shard of glass inserted under Mara's skin, leaving her raw and aching. As she watched, something inside her began to shift. A slow realization that Junie wasn't just a memory, but a living being whose existence had been erased from their family's narrative. The guilt was crushing. Why hadn't Mara fought harder against Elias and Lethe? Why had she let them take away the one person who mattered most? One evening, as the first drops of rain began to patter against her window, Mara pulled out Junie's yellow boot again and sat with it cradled in her hands. She'd come to think of it as a connection to a daughter, a tangible link to the child she'd lost. She could almost feel Junie's small foot inside, remember the way the rubber stretched over her chubby toes as they toddled across the floor. And then, without warning, Mara felt the boot slip from her hands and clatter against the hardwood, sending the echoes of its fall reverberating through the empty apartment. For a moment, she simply stared at it there on the ground, this symbol of grief and loss and denial. Then, with a deep breath, Mara picked up the boot again, her fingers closing around its familiar shape as if to draw Junie back into her arms. She knew what she had to do next. The question was whether Elias would stand by her side or continue down his own path of avoidance. It was time for Mara to confront him once more, this time with the weight of undeniable truth, armed not just with memories but also the fierce determination to reclaim their daughter's existence in a world that had tried so hard to erase it. Mara walked through the townhouse, her eyes landing on each empty space, as if they might suddenly fill with Junie's laughter or Elias's attempt at a smile. The apartment felt cavernous without the girl. Every step echoed off the walls like a funeral march. Mara paused in front of the second bedroom door, once sealed shut, but now swinging open to reveal the bare room beyond. It was as if she could see right through it to Junie playing with her dolls on the floor. Except that wasn't true anymore. She found Elias in the kitchen, staring out the window at the rain-soaked streets below. Mara's heart sank at his posture, slumped shoulders, downturned mouth. "Mara," Elias said quietly without turning around, "I didn't expect you home so soon. I couldn't stay away forever." Mara set the yellow boot down on the counter next to him, watching as he flinched at the sight of it. "Elias, we need to talk about Junie." He let out a long sigh and finally turned to face her, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep or unshed tears. Mara couldn't tell which anymore. "There's nothing left to say," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Oh, really?" Mara asked, her anger rising like bile in the back of her throat. "Because I've got a whole lot to say about how you signed away our daughter without even asking me, how you let erase her from my mind and heart." "I did it for you," Elias shot back, his voice cracking. "I couldn't bear the thought of living with your grief every day." "Don't you dare." Mara's hands shook as she slammed them down on the counter. "You didn't get to decide that. Junie was our child, and her memory is mine to grieve over however I want." "I know," Elias whispered, hanging his head in shame. "But what choice did I have? You couldn't live with it." Mara interrupted, her voice cold as ice. "I didn't choose not to live with it. Lethe chose for me, and you went along with them, signing away the most precious thing we had." "Elias," her tone softened slightly, but only because she could see the anguish written across his face. "We can't keep living like this, as if Junie never existed at all. She did, and she deserves to be remembered." For a moment, Elias looked like he might argue, but then he nodded slowly, his eyes filling with tears. "I know," he said hoarsely. "But how do we go back? How do we face the world again after what Lethe did? Mara's gaze fell upon the yellow boot once more, and she reached out to pick it up again. We start by facing each other, she said softly. Then we can work on rebuilding our lives and Juni's memory. As Elias nodded in agreement, Mara felt a spark of hope ignite within her. For the first time since that fateful day, she dared to believe they might just find their way back to their daughter, even if it meant confronting the darkest parts of themselves along the way.